Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the final session of our streams. We're in the environment and climate change session, and our first topic for this block is EcoVineyards are uniting project partners to grow resilience and functional biodiversity in production systems, and this will be presented by Dr. Mary Retallick from Retallick Viticulture. Come up.
Thank you and welcome everyone. I'm delighted to have the opportunity today to talk to you more about the EcoVineyards program. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country on which we meet today, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I'm delighted to be joining you today from Ghana country in the spectacular Adelaide Hills. I'd also like to acknowledge all of our program partners. The EcoVineyards program is a National Landcare funded project between Retallick Viticulture and the Wine Grape Council of South Australia, and also more than 60 partnering businesses. Today I'd like to tell you a story, not about a coffee mug, but about a friendship and the power of support and collaboration. Often it takes just one person, and as Margaret Mead would say, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, and indeed it's the only thing that ever has. Well, my group started with one other person. We were a group of two that soon grew. This is Lisa Bernier from the Wine Grape Council of South Australia, and I think it's fair to say without her support I probably wouldn't be standing here today. But before I get ahead of myself, I'd like to give you a little bit of background to my story. This is a vineyard that I managed about 20 years ago. I was armed with under and postgraduate qualifications in ecology, natural resource management, teaching and also viticulture. It was an entirely intuitive decision. I guess it was entirely intuitive for me as soon as I'd secured a vineyard management role in my late 20s to plant native insectary plants as they provide valuable habitat for fauna and also in and around production systems. We proceeded to plant about 8,000 plants over a 3-year period of locally adapted native grasses, forbs, low-growing woody prostrate plants and shrubs. And when the vineyard was sold and changed hands, I was shocked to find out that these valuable plants had been sprayed out with herbicides. I realised that I'd need to do more to demonstrate the widespread ecosystem benefits to a wide audience to create meaningful change and to share the reasons why supplementary flora is so important. I was so determined and a little bit grumpy that I embarked on a PhD focusing on native insectary plants and arthropods, so they're the insects and spiders found in association, while I was also running my own business. Fast forward to November 2018, so some 15 years later, I met Lisa at a local event just after she'd started in the role as business manager. I shared my vision with her over a cuppa, and she sent this lovely email back in return. I would love a trial site in each of the 7 South Australia regions as a joint initiative between regions and the Wine Grape Council of South Australia, but that might be me just dreaming. This humble dream started to take shape soon after when we decided to work in partnership together, and we were successful in receiving support from the National Landcare program via their Smart Farms small grants, both in round 2 and also in round 4. I captured this discussion on a coffee mug to remind us just how far we'd come over the previous 3 years. Contrary to what this picture portrays, I didn't spend all my waking hours looking wistfully at the sky, bathed in the glow of the setting sun, but I do believe in creating your own luck. And as they say, this is preparation meeting opportunity, as well as a lot of grit and determination and a lot of hard work. I'd like to provide an overview of some of the information that we share with growers. Of course, natural systems are rather complex, but we try and provide real-life examples to demonstrate what's possible. We start simply and we talk about the fact that biodiversity is the diversity of plant and animal life, and that each species is really important. They have a niche in the ecosystem and each contributes to its functionality. Many growers are pretty comfortable about planting a cover crop in the mid-row, but what we're doing is extending out the range of species and the locations in which we might plant those species so that we can boost the functional biodiversity in vineyards. By planting appropriate plant species, what we find is that we can attract insectivorous birds, like this endangered diamond firetail finch, but also fantails. We can also attract microbats, which can consume up to half their body weight in insects every night, and they love eating moths, which is great for us because one of our key insect pests in vineyards is the light brown apple moth. We also try and attract raptor species, and you can see here we've got a bowbook owl with a mouse in its beak, but also other raptor species like brown goshawks. And what they do is they will actively, well, they're territorial, so they'll go through and patrol the perimeter of a vineyard and very effectively keep pest fruitivorous bird species out. We also talk about the importance of building resilience in our production systems, and resilience really relates to the capacity of a system to reorganise after a local disturbance, and that might also include extreme weather events. So we're aspiring to future-proof our production systems. In order to do this, we need to get away from the dead zone or the herbicide strip that we currently see in many vineyards. What we're advocating for is 100% functional plant cover 100% of the time, wherever possible. And of course, this is really important to grow the soil carbon sponge and to be able to then reintroduce the hydrology cycle so that that works really effectively as well. And as plants transpire, they've got the capacity to help cool the environment. When we're looking at native insectary plants, we're interested in their provisioning services. So that's the capacity to provide food by way of nectar, but also pollen, shelter, and the capacity to provide alternative prey. So their functional capacity to provide habitat is really important to attract the species that we can use for biocontrol in vineyards. And we tend to summarise these relationships via this acronym, which is SNAP. S for shelter, N for nectar, A for alternative prey, and P for pollen. When I did my PhD studies, I had a limited range of excellent stands of native insectary plants to source from, so I focused my efforts there in the first instance. And we find that native evergreen shrubs have fantastic provisioning services. So some examples here are Bosseria spinosa, and also with Bosseria spinosa, we call that Christmas bush, but of course common names can be quite deceptive. Christmas bush is completely different in Victoria, and I think over here it's called blackthorn, so I always revert back to the botanical name. And in the second species I looked at was Leptospermum continentale, which we refer to as prickly tea tree. And we know that if we introduce these two evergreen shrubs, that it's possible to increase the functional biodiversity of predatory arthropods by more than 3 times compared to just vineyards alone. I'm always delighted too when the grape growers come to me telling me the botanical names quite proudly, so they're catching on really quickly. I also looked at wallaby grasses, a range of wallaby grasses. The botanical name is Retidosperma. And what we found with the wallaby grasses is that we can get a net number of predatory morphospecies increasing by around 27% compared to grapevines alone. So we're getting quite a separate suite of predatory arthropods found at ground level. Some of the other attributes which are really important are that native plants are naturally adapted to our drowsy conditions, and they're also consistently reported as having a lower occurrence of pests and a higher occurrence of natural enemies. We also know that more than 90% of Australia's species of flora and fauna are endemic, and many of the natural enemies are also endemic, and they've co-evolved with these native plants. So when we plant these native plants, we know that we're going to attract the types of species that we need and are desirable in a vineyard context. There's a diversity of different predatory arthropods. Here's just a snapshot of a few of them here. The good news is that there's millions of little insect workers, as well as the microbats and insectivorous birds in production systems that are able to provide natural biological control virtually for free if we understand how to attract and look after them. It's also important to remember that when we kill off the natural enemies of a pest, we inherit their work. So when we're working with, we call them eco-growers, one of the first things that we do is we create a biodiversity action plan. And this is a picture of one of our properties on Kangaroo Island, and you can see there that it's divided up into different management areas. So some of the different focus areas that they have on this property are to create a biodiversity trail adjacent to the cellar door to help educate visitors, but also to plant the plants in a round area so that we can create nature rooms for ecotourism experiences. We're also planting a range of woody ground covers and small shrubs adjacent to strainer posts. We might be doing different species in the undervine area, mixed cover cropping, whether that's commercial cover cropping species or native grasses and forbs in the mid-row, and also creating vegetation corridors. We arm the growers with lots of information. One of the first places we start is to seek out a pre-European plant species list for a particular property. I then take those species and I transform those lists into really meaningful information about the types of spacing around those native plants, when they're flowering, the colour of the flowers. So we're looking for a diversity of species that overlap so we don't create a resource bottleneck with everything flowering at once and then there being a lack of food for the arthropods that we're wanting to maintain. We've also got 44 demonstration sites spread throughout South Australia, so I'll just run quickly through some of those examples. This is eco-grower Hans Loader from Penley Estate. They've got a whole range of species planted adjacent to the strainer posts, but they're also creating valuable habitat under these lone paddock gums to try and reinstate some of the understory. This is Janet Klein. You may have seen her on the video that was taken last night. She's from EcoVineyards in the Adelaide Hills, and they've been pioneering the use of wallaby grasses or Retidosperma, plus a diverse range of different other grass species and forbs on an organic and biodynamically grown vineyard. And you can see, if I just go back, that we've got these lovely signs that just help to educate the general public. They're also putting in this case, Leptospermum continentale adjacent to the strainer posts, but they're also putting Baseria spinosa, the Christmas bush or sweet Baseria, to replace vines in the vine row rather than replacing them with vines, so we're getting those provisioning services in the vineyard. Other growers have really helped to pioneer the use of grasses and forbs. So this is Dan Falkenberg's property in the Barossa, and we've been working with seeding natives to put in a diverse mix of 20 different species, which has oversown what was previously a 10-year-old stand of wallaby grass. Back to Janet's place, they're a biodynamic and organically certified grower, and you can see here, reluctantly, sometimes it's short-term pain for long-term gain. We've used a combination of cultivation and organically certified herbicide to prep the area. It's really important to have thorough prep because the grasses don't do well in establishment if there's competition. Once they're established, they perform magnificently. So you can see here just a few months later that we've got a lovely stand and diverse mix of grasses and forbs. We also work with growers to do some basic monitoring, and this is an example of a vacuum sampler, a non-destructive method where we can go through and sample vegetation to see what arthropods we find in association. We're also working with different technology providers to be able to go through, and in this case, Hydroseeding Australia, incorporate native seeds into liquid mulch, and this example is actually using subclover So you can see there that they've got a nice stand in the undervine area, which would otherwise be a dead zone. In the Riverland, we're working with Sheridan Owen from Stars Reach in New Residence. And here she's tried a range of woody ground creeping species. So this is Myoporum parvifolium, creeping boobiella, which is doing really well. In the Adelaide Hills, we're also working with Ashton Hills, and we've created a biohedge of prickly species, prickly tea tree, and also the Passeria spinosa as a biohedge, which is functionally fantastic from a biodiversity perspective, but it also provides a biosecurity passive barrier to stop anyone hopefully jumping over the hedge once it's mature. In the Clare Valley, we're working with David and Cheryl Walton, who have planted a whole range of Passeria adjacent to the strainer posts. And this is Phil Barron. We've partnered with Phil and also Lock to put together predator perches so we can attract a whole range of raptors into the vineyard, where otherwise we'd have a large expanse without any high points to attract those birds. We're of course really interested not only in what happens above ground but below ground, so another shout out to Oliver and his fantastic program around soil yandis. And we're getting some really lovely testimonials back from our growers as well. So this is what a pair of undies look like in really gutless Blewett Spring sands after 5 weeks in winter. An amazing result. And Lulu's been growing grapes for many years, and her comment is that I've learnt so much more about the ecology and interactions of plants, insects, and even the soil and its microbiome since beginning with EcoVineyards. And after 35 years of being in the same job, it's reintroduced enthusiasm back into it, and I'm really excited about the future. So everything we do, we try and make as practical as possible. We draw on growers' knowledge, so if they come from a background of cover cropping, we talk to them about the fact that that's probably more of a short-term solution to reboot the system, but we're looking for longer-term solutions to try and break that cycle of intervention. And to create practice change, we start simply and we grow the knowledge base and then go from there. So just to finish, I'll give you just some quick examples of ways that we've demonstrated some of this value on our website. We've actually planted more than 41,555 plants so far in the first 2.5 years of the program. We've got a range of fact sheets which are freely available, and we also have a range of case studies. We've got about 20 up at the moment from all around South Australia, which anyone can download and have a look at. Of course, caring for country is more than words, it's about action. So we're trying to demonstrate the practical value that we're able to achieve. We've also produced a range of demonstration sites, educational material, and also no spray signage for those growers that are still making the transition, and in some cases planting native insectary plants in the undervine area, and then they might even spray them out with herbicides. So we've created some signage just to prompt them not to do that. So what we're doing is we're wanting to bridge the gap of knowledge, confidence and culture, create an understanding of agroecology, demonstrate practical insights via participatory action learning, and longer-term thinking to create long-lasting solutions. We're highlighting connections between nature and farming, and what we're finding is that there's leaders or early adopters in every region. They lead the way for others to follow. We've also developed lots of useful information. So this is a booklet with lots of pictures of those predatory arthropods, those good bugs, and the plants found, the insects and the plants in which they're found in association. So if you'd like to find out more, please join us using the EcoVineyards handle either at Facebook or Instagram. And most excitingly, we're just about to go national. We've received funding from Wine Australia, so we'll be working in regions all over Australia, which is a really exciting new development. So I'd encourage you to dream. I'd encourage you to not only dream, but to dream big. We need leaders, but we also need an army of doers on the ground, and leadership can be supporting your mates to come along to a planting event or sharing information with colleagues. Every little bit helps. And all of the information I've shared with you can be scaled up and applied cross-sectorally to a wide range of production systems and possibly internationally as well. So please join us at EcoVineyards.com, and we look forward to welcoming you and sharing knowledge with kindness and generosity.
Thank you so much, Marion. It's great to see that, you're going national with those fantastic outcomes, and hopefully they can be seen right across the country. We'll open the floor to questions. So if you're online, you can submit some, but we'll start with the in-the-room questions.
Just curious, some of the sites that you showed at the start were, how many of the sites are actually mechanically harvested?
Probably a large percentage would be. There'd be a handful that would be hand. So out of the 44, I'd make a guess there's probably 75% of them would be machine harvested.
There was a couple of sites where you had the native species planted within the vineyard. Do you get any sort of cross-contamination within the grape material that you actually harvest with those plants? Do you get the breakages that go into the grapes and contaminate, I guess, is a question.
Sure. That's an early question that we had where growers were concerned where we might have had plants at the end of strainer posts. So I think the likelihood of that is probably pretty low, but some species are pretty aromatic, like the prickly tea tree. So we've got the option to perhaps put a bag over those species as we're running down the row if you're mechanically harvesting. But we haven't actually done that work. So what we're doing at the moment, I guess, is creating the opportunity to then do further research. So while the height likelihood is low, we haven't quantified that, but we're keen to explore any concerns that growers have so that we can then answer those questions and make sure that it's not going to be an issue going forward.
Amazing work, looks like a really good program. Do you have any plans to expand into stone fruit or citrus or those kind of things?
I've done a little bit of work in pistachios. I've had a lot of interest from walnuts and other nut crops and also macadamias as well. What we're finding is that this information is applicable to a really broad range of cropping systems. We've worked with the Port Phillip and Western Port Catchment Management Authority, who have just been merged into Melbourne Water in Victoria, and they've done work looking at berry cropping situations, broadacre, which is based on my work as well. But there's also a huge body of work and other researchers that have been working in this area also. So the answer to your question is that I haven't, but I know that this information is applicable.
My question is just about the impact of having vines in the undervine on water use of the vines. Have you done some trials on that?
Yeah, there's been a little bit of work done through Adelaide University, and I think on a very low vigor site you may get drawdown in the first year, perhaps where you've got perennial species that are establishing. That tends to even out by year 3. If you've got a high vigor site, of course, you'll get the benefit of a bit of a drawdown if there's excessive vigor there. But when you start to then look beyond year 2, 3, you get exponential benefits going forward. And we're also finding that we're getting much improved carbon sequestration with some work that's been done where we've had native grasses in the undervine area compared to a bare herbicide strip, and there's an increase of 23% in terms of the comparison between the two. Understanding how to work with some of these new species and managing expectations is important, but if you're looking beyond just year 1 to a longer term view, it might mean that you might not break even if you're planting native grasses and forbs in the mid-row until year 3, but then you don't have to intervene thereafter. So you might save $600 a hectare, plus all the benefits of not having to intervene and disturbing the soil and so forth.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary.
Thank you.